Hi, thanks for tuning in. Welcome to Some Soothings. This is Season 2, Episode 2. My name is Joshua. I am a musician, glitch, and sound artist, and Some Soothings is a 30-minute weekly live stream in which I'll share and discuss art, music, poetry, history. There'll be some jokes, there'll be some earnestness, I'm sure, and there'll be some live improvised music. This is an outlet. It's a place for me to, work out ideas aloud, and hopefully connect a little bit with you all, like however asynchronously it might sort of feel through these screens. The show will endeavor to be really soft, really vulnerable, really tender. It all may feel like a little new agey, but we are taking a broad definition of the word soothing, and we will not be ignoring any of the seriousnesses or complexities of our contemporary moment. So, welcome. Thanks for tuning in. Quick housekeeping. Everything we talk about on the show tonight will have more info in the info doc, which is in the pinned comment at the bottom. There'll be videos and links to my research and that sort of thing all in there. Speaking of the comments, I can't really clock them while I'm going, but I am recording them all, and I will check them out later tonight when I'm drinking my nightly glass of lemongrass tea, and I'll respond to any questions or critique on next week's show. That said, I think that I can sort of feel it in my soul when that heart explosion thing happens, so if you want to do that. Okay, let's look at some art. So this is Untitled by Ruth Asawa from 1952. The materials are brass, and iron wire. Asawa was born in 1926 in Norwalk, California, and then crossed the veil again in 2013. Their work is collected everywhere: Whitney, MoMA, Tate, Art Institute Chicago, SF MoMA. My favorite place to view Asawa's work is in the observation tower at the De Young Museum in San Francisco. There's a full collection of Asawa's work there, and the De Young is just this really special place in the heart of Golden Gate Park. It's a really, really nice viewing experience. Also, last week, the post office, the USPS, released a series of postage stamps to honor Asawa, and depicting work from different eras of their life. The stamps are super beautiful, so I'm going to show those to y'all now as I kind of go through Asawa's bio, so check these stamps out. So Asawa's parents were first-generation Japanese immigrants, and Asawa's childhood is spent on the family's small Southern California farm. That is until 1942, and so Asawa is 16 years old. And this is when the U.S. government begins interning Japanese American citizens, and Asawa's family, except their father, was held at the Santa Anita racetrack camp, and then later moved totally across the country to the Rower Relocation Center in Arkansas. Asawa's father was taken to a detention camp in New Mexico, and so for 6 months following this, the Asawa family didn't even know whether he was alive or dead. And in fact, the Asawas do not see their father for 6 years. And this is sort of important to clock some of these details. These were American citizens. This is a family of American citizens that ran a vegetable farm. They ended up spending years separated in internment camps. Although this is in living memory, right? Folks that spent their childhoods in these detention centers are still alive today. So I don't know, that's a thing. Anyway, back to Asawa's bio. So the war ends, and Asawa goes to undergrad in Wisconsin, and then after a couple years transfers to the Black Mountain College in North Carolina. I think maybe we'll do a feature on the Black Mountain College at some point. It's just this wildly influential art school. And so Asawa takes courses kind of across disciplines: drawing with Joseph Albers, music with John Cage, painting with Willem de Kooning, sculpture with Buckminster Fuller, and dance with Merce Cunningham. I mean, come on, this faculty is out of control. It's this amazing collection, an amazing point in time. And of course, this is all deeply formative for Asawa. After college, Asawa returns to California, setting up a studio in the Bay Area, where they pretty much stay for the rest of their life, making work, raising a family, in their later days investing substantial energy and resources advocating for arts education, and eventually opening an art school themselves. So turning here to Untitled, I just find this work so lovely. These seedling, pod, droplet, organic-y forms, but like constructed from metal, from this iron and brass. And this photograph is really special too, because that beautiful shadow is just really a thing. It evokes the weightlessness of the whole of the work. It's so airy. And so Asawa focuses kind of on this mode for most of their careers, exploring forms that sort of look like this. And you probably got a sense of that from looking at the stamps. This work varies in size and arrangement and specific form, but there's hundreds of these like seedling-ish sculptures. One of the reasons that I love seeing Asawa's work at the De Young is that the De Young shows like 24 of these together at a time, and so the aggregate effect, it makes it sort of like an installation, and like the shadows knit together, and your perspective shifts as you move about the room. It's just really potent. Seeing many of these at once is an experience I recommend. And so lastly, I want to briefly touch on like 3 like conceptual bits. The first is to simply like marvel at the activity of creation in this work. Like the labor of hand twisting 1,000 tiny wires. What it means is like keep this thing balanced and untangled. I don't feel like Asawa implies the artist's hand at all in the work. So I think it's important that we remember that it's there. And also recall that there's like hundreds of these sculptures, right? This is like a lifetime of minutiae in the service of making beauty. And for me, like in that accumulation, I feel just like real awe. Okay, so second conceptual idea. What a complicated American narrative. This is like a second-gen citizen from a tiny farm who then is interred in internment camps in these detention centers, then goes to college, then goes on to like massive international acclaim in like a pretty abstract artistic practice, to then later championing the arts education of the next generation of Americans, and then to like posthumously be enshrined on a stamp. I don't know, it all just seems like impossibly like hopeful and grim and American. It's really, I don't know, it's a thing. So the third idea here then is, Asawa describes their use of wire as a way of drawing in space. And for me, what feels really potent and poetical is that the work like defines space, but does not contain it. Like it holds space, it creates a vessel, but that vessel is like porous and inviting. I just think there's like a really rich set of metaphors in that. This is a particular combination of attributes to like really aspire to. Like politically, for example, a humane national immigration policy holds space, but is porous and inviting. And I guess I end down to like a personal level, like when I think about how I want to move through the world, like how I want to learn and live and love, it is these 3 things too. To hold space, but to be porous and inviting. And then specifically, if like the sculpture, like if I too am graced by light shown through me, I hope that the shadow cast is as like delicate and sinuous and as lovely as Asawa's here. Okay, Ruth Asawa, y'all. I hope someone is like making a biopic of their life. I would love to see the story depicted. There's more info in the info doc linked below. Okay, so in our next bit on the show, we look at old-timey, interesting food, or progressive politics and history. This is Radical History Snacks. So last week on August 6th was the 55-year anniversary of the signing of the Federal Voting Rights Act, which endeavored to prohibit racial discrimination in voting. Researching this was a little disheartening. The history of voter suppression in the U.S. is, centuries long, and it's really just like a cycle of white supremacists employing violence and legal loopholes to disenfranchise communities of color. This is unsurprising, right? But I don't know, it's disheartening nonetheless. Something else kind of curious here, because it does feel different from how our branches of government operate now, is that in the 19th and much of the 20th century, it feels like Congress is attempting to protect voter rights, while the Supreme Court is undermining and disenfranchising these populations. And nowadays I sort of feel like that's the inverse, like we rely on the Supreme Court to defend our rights while Congress seeks to undermine them. I don't know, I'm likely overgeneralizing on this, but that seems sort of interesting to me how that's shifted. Anyway, let's do a quick skim through the history of the Voting Rights Act. February 3rd, 1870, the 15th Amendment is ratified, and this prohibits the federal government and the states from denying citizens the right to vote based on, quote, that citizens' race, color, or previous condition of servitude, end quote. Let's go back on that for a second, and so the context of the Post-Emancipation Proclamation requires language like previous condition of servitude. So that's where this starts, right? In response to the 15th Amendment, states adopt new state constitutions and enact laws to create new barriers to voter registration. Poll taxes, literacy taxes, evidence of property, requiring evidence of property ownership, and then at the ballot box itself, the KKK showing up. It implied intimidation and violence, and then at times also actual intimidation and violence. So when we say Jim Crow laws, part of what we're talking about are these kind of racist attempts at voter suppression. These lead to protracted legal battles between the states, the federal Congress, and the federal Supreme Court. With the states and the Supreme Court, frankly, threading these legal needles, and Congress passing increasingly specific laws to thwart that. Basically, the states would exploit a loophole, undermining the pretty clear spirit of the 15th Amendment, but that loophole would then be upheld by the Supreme Court, and then Congress would have to make a new law to plug the hole. This goes on for 80 years, with amendments and laws in this sort of back and forth cycle. Until the civil rights movement takes up the mantle in the 60s and 70s, or in the 50s and 60s, pressuring the feds to just sort this out once and for all. And so civil rights movement and voting are obviously deeply intertwined. And so, all the work of Malcolm X, MLK, John Lewis, the Black Panthers, the Freedom Riders, and really specifically the Selma Montgomery March, all this sets the stage for the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which is designed to provide a means to enforce the voting rights that are guaranteed by the 15th Amendment. And that was finally signed into law on August 6th, 1965. So over its 55-year history, the Voting Rights Act has seen substantive legal challenges, revisions, amendments. Special provisions in the Act have been renewed and reinforced 6 times from 1970 to 2006, because voting discrimination and suppression and this kind of cycle of loophole finding has continued. Currently a further extension of the Voting Rights Act just passed the House last December, but it stalled as the current administration has threatened to veto it. I would encourage you all to do a little digging into this history. It feels to me, instructive to see this cycle of disenfranchisement. Racists in power continue to exploit loopholes. They continue to undermine the spirit of the 15th Amendment. I think currently like voter ID laws and the false accusation of absentee ballot fraud is like our contemporary version of this. And I don't know, in a democracy, this all feels really important. So more info in the doc below, Voting Rights Act, 1965. Up next, we have our special feature. We have a real treat this week. Our special feature is watching drips drop while listening to hip-hop. Our music is from the 80s Japanese hip-hop trio Scha, Dara, Parr. Enjoy. Listening to hip-hop as we watch drips drop. Usually on Some Soothings we take a brief look at organizations or an organizer doing work that we really admire. I will have researched and donated to the org in question, and in sharing I'm encouraging you to consider doing so as well. So this week we are looking at the Movement for Black Lives. The Movement for Black Lives is a national coalition of over 150 Black-led orgs that are combating systemic racism, like in this collective way, sort of at all levels, and using a diversity of tactics. So like, local mutual aid orgs, and even up all the way to like national policy lobbying in Washington, D.C. I find their statement of intent like really powerful. So I'm just going to read this. So, quote, "We believe that prisons, police, and all other institutions that inflict violence on Black people must be abolished and replaced by institutions that value and affirm the flourishing of Black lives. We believe in centering the experiences and leadership of the most marginalized Black people, including but not limited to those who are trans and queer, women and femmes, currently and formerly incarcerated, immigrants, disabled, working class, and poor. We believe in transformation and a radical realignment of power. We build kinship with one another. We draw from political lessons, grow in our leadership, and expand our base to build a stronger movement. We are anti-capitalist. We believe and understand that Black people will never achieve liberation under the current global racialized capitalist system." End quote. So super into it, doing critical work, really interesting, really important organization. So consider a donation to the Movement for Black Lives. Donation link and info is in the pinned comments. All right, gang, let's play a little bit of music. How much time do we have? Oh, good. Okay, so I think I'll probably do about maybe like 6 minutes or so of some live improvised electronic music. So I'm going to switch some things up and we'll get going on that. Alright, so Naomi, Shihab, and I was born in 1952. They currently reside in San Antonio. They are wildly prolific. They have 24 volumes of poetry, 3 novels, they have stories for children, fantastic collection of essays called Never in a Hurry. Trying to suggest like somewhere to start. I guess I'd say look for Words Under the Words, which collects just like a bunch of their early work. Red Suitcase is kind of like a middle era. That's a really, really beautiful collection. And then Tender Spot collects a bunch of later poems. So that would be my recommendation, to look into some of those books. Today's poem is How Palestinians Keep Warm. Tiny bit of background on this. Islamic skywatchers and caliphate scientists in the 9th, 10th, and 11th centuries just made really profound strides in the field of astronomy. They created new tools, new geometries. They were the first to posit an attempt to measure the Earth turning on its axis, and which, that like later laid the groundwork for the Copernican revolution, like 500 years later. Most of this knowledge is lost during the Crusades, but some of it ends up translated into Latin, and as such we have many stars with these like transliterated Latin Arabic names, or just like straight up Arabic names. This poem references some of them. I did, in fact, spend some time working on my Arabic, but I definitely need some work, so forgive any mispronunciations. This is How Palestinians Keep Warm. Choose one word and say it over and over until it builds a fire inside your mouth. Hadafara, the one who holds out. Al-Fard, the solitary one. The stars were named by people like us. Each night they line up on the long path between worlds. They nod and blink, no right or wrong in their yellow eyes. Dara, little house, unfold your walls and take us in. My well went dry. My grandfather's grapes have stopped singing. I stir the coals, my babies cry. How will I teach them they belong to the stars? They build forts and they say, this is mine. How will I teach them to love mizar, veil, cloak, to know that behind it an ancient man is fanning a flame? He stirs the dark wind of our breath. He says the veil will rise till they see us shining, spreading like embers on the blessed hills. Well, I made that part up. Not so sure about mizar, but I know we need to keep warm here on Earth. And when your shawl is as thin as mine, you tell stories. It's so good. Naomi, Shihab, and I, How Palestinians Keep Warm. More info and a link to this poem in the info doc. And that is our show. Thanks for watching, everyone. Have a lovely week. Take really good care of yourselves. Take really good care of each other. Good night.